water than any soil that is untreated with compost. Unlike chemical fertilizers, compost allows the nutrients to slowly go to the plant, slowly take the nutrients from the compost as needed. I believe you had...
That's probably one of the better parts of the composting, I think, because it happens slowly over time. Whereas if I buy my Miracle-Gro and put it on, my Peter's Professional mix, it goes in and it's gone. And that's too much work for me, quite frankly. And my compost just holds the water. I have much less watering to do, much less feeding to do, because I've got my micronutrients in there. So that's primarily why we prefer the compost and organic fertilizers to the chemical ones. They'll do the job. It's just too much work and too much money.
Okay. The concept of composting is global. The Chinese feed 22% of the world's population on just 7% of the globe's arable land. They do this through a continued and intensive application of organic materials. They amend their farmlands with legume cover crops, and they use dredged river silt, which is very rich, and mix it in with their legumes, and therefore they compost their farmland.
There was another thing when Luella was researching her stuff on that, and I thought of a couple of other things. Did most of you read Michener's Chesapeake? You remember what they learned from the Indians? They had this terrible sandy soil, and they would drag in the fish heads and turn them under and created very friable, fertile soil out of what had been previously sandy, useless, dead soil, and were able to grow very well. When I was in Ireland a couple of years ago, I thought, how do they do it? They have all these lush, green areas, and everything is rock. It's nothing but rock. It sits up there, it's poking out of the ocean, windswept, craggy. How could anything grow there? And the explanation I was given was that many generations ago, those early peoples would climb down those terribly steep cliffs, can't even talk, and bring the kelp up from the beaches. And I thought, that makes sense. One of the most common organic fertilizers that we use is seaweed. The same with fish emulsion. That's another very common organic fertilizer that we use, and that's what the people in Chesapeake did. So it's all that natural stuff. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use chemical fertilizers, not at all. We take no position. But since we're here to talk about composting and natural things, I just thought those were rather interesting.
A little note to that too is compost is not a fertilizer. It is an amendment to your soil. We want to be very clear on that. Before we do the slide presentation, what I'd like to say is you can make composting as big or as little an undertaking as you choose. You will find some composters that have a passionate pursuit to find the perfect recipe to give them humus-laden compost as quickly as possible in the shortest amount of time. Then other composters, I believe I've talked to some here, yes, where you just find a place in your yard and you rake the leaves and you can put some leaves, you put your cuttings, your prunings from your shrubs and your plants. And once in a while, you go to your compost pile, and from the very bottom, you'll take some finished compost and use it. That's perfectly all right also. Also, I talked to someone, and she said she was going to put all her compost through a screen before she used it. I have never done that. I might have a few twigs, and do you do that, Mary? She doesn't either. So, I mean, we don't, it's not that much for us, you know. Pardon me?
I know everything that we'll know.
Before you put it in. Yes, excellent. Yes. To be successful in compost, we must be aware of a few things. First, we must have a realization that no matter how many little mistakes we make, we will come out with probably a good compost that is usable. A large mistake would be putting gasoline on your compost pile to activate the heat. That is definitely bad, and that is pure plagiarism. I got it right from one of these books. Second, what we need is a basic understanding of the life forms and processes that operate within the compost pile. We're ready to show you our slide presentation now.
Point, and after we get through the slides, perhaps some of the concerns that were raised will already have been answered, but we'll go over them more specifically for you, okay? Alrighty. The primary things that go into compost, and truly I do want you to come up and this is mine, and you can judge which one's nicer, hers or mine. I can tell you one thing about composting. Two things I know, never, ever biodegrade. Kitty litter, because I did it, and Easter grass is no longer paper. My pink Easter grass is still in here from last year. Those are the only two things I know with absolute certainty. So that's what goes into it at the beginning, and that's what we have at the end. All right. Oh, come on. All right. Backwards. I'm sorry. Well, and do that for me, hon. I'm sorry. This thing was working. I'm really sorry. Why? Those are the primary goals that have been set up. The concern is to decrease on an individual basis as much as we can what goes into the landfill. We're running out of room. I don't think there's a whole lot of argument in any group on that subject. Okay? That's right. I mean, we can't do anything about our cars, our refrigerators, but we can do something about what we generate on our own property. Go ahead. Just, yeah. That gives you the breakdown of municipal waste. So you see, we could make a difference. Paper products is a big one. Make sure somebody reminds me to talk about paper products before we get done. I have a tendency to forget these things now and then. Can really make a difference. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, sure. Paper products account for almost 38% of what's in the landfills. Think about your newspaper. Think about our bills. Think about the paper shredder by the desk. I could empty that thing every day. You know? Food's only 10%. We can deal with a lot of that. What's a pre-recycled yard waste? 12.5%. Metal's only 7.6%. That surprised me. And glass only 5.7%. Plastic 10%. That's the same as food. I would have thought it was more. And miscellaneous 15%. So we can make an impact on paper, food, and if we recycle our glass and plastic, we've done another good deed. Go ahead, Llewellyn. You can just click them when you feel like it.
I do want to add on the paper. You would really not want to have any more than 20% paper in your compost.
Thank you. She keeps me honest. And what do we need? Our decomposers. That picture there is exactly what the compost bins that we've been building in South Park look like. We have 3 of them, and I think it was Lois who says she has 3 bins. Okay, we have 3, and that's kind of what ours looked like when I left it last fall. So you need the critters to do the work and the food to feed the critters. Air, water, and warmth keep everybody happy. Is that better? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yes.
Cover for the compost bin to heat things up, or is it not
A covered
necessary?
bin in the shade will probably decompose faster than an open bin in the shade. And it's always recommended that you put your compost pile in shade rather than bright sun, simply because you're going to have more heat in there. But it's a matter of how fast you want it. It'll all happen. Compost happens, just faster or slower.
Why would something in the shade be harder than something in the sun?
It'll dry out too fast if it's in the sun, and it's not the sun that makes it hot. It's the microorganisms acting on the material in there that produces the heat, not the sun. And if you have it in the sun, it's just going to dry out, and if it's too, nothing's going to happen. You need moisture in there too, air and.
Mary has both. She has both. I saw her compost, and she has the earth box, which is covered, and she also has, like, I would say, an open pit. And I just have the covered. The 3 earth bins is what I have.
If you build it, they will come. I like that. I saw that movie too. We'll talk about food scraps. You want to be careful with food. And we've already talked about somebody had rats, and someone else before the program started had mentioned rodents. That's something to think about. And then you might want to think about covered bins as opposed to an open bin if that's a problem. But we'll get into that later. Okay. That's a lot of bacteria and fungal threads. This is probably as good a place as any to mention this. Fungal threads. Part of my background, I'm a nurse. I work in a dermatology office. I'm very aware of fungal infections. I'm very aware of skin infections generally. And as much as I love to play in the dirt, and we all do, there is some need to be somewhat cautious. If you have a compromised immune system, if you've had a mastectomy with lymph nodes removed, if you're prone to fungal infections, if your hands have abrasions or small cuts on them, I'm careful out in the garden. I have to keep my nails clean because I go to work and I don't want to look gross. And I just don't like yucky fingernails. But I have had 2 like cuticle infections, and I know it's attributable either to the horse or the garden. I'm not sure which, but one of those other. I garden with gloves on. I wear cotton gloves and latex or vinyl liners over them just because. Now, that may not apply to everyone, but I would feel remiss if I didn't mention that. My sister had nearly a life-threatening infection. She's had her lymph nodes removed for malignancy and inadvertently got into some contaminated soil, and it was very serious. So do protect yourself. Go ahead. Lots of things are out there to jumpstart your compost pile. If that's how you want to spend your money and you want to support the garden center, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They work beautifully. But you don't need them. You can do them if you want to, but making compost doesn't have to cost money at all. And don't let anybody tell you that you have to have it. We can tell you how to do it on the cheap. Best food for our decomposers. All will compost, but not all should be added. Okay, garden trimmings. You ought not to probably put weeds that have gone to seed. This is the perfect time to start your compost pile if you haven't before. You've got everything you need. You've got last year's leaves still spread all around. You've got to clean up anyway, so why not clean up and get them in one place? You've got all those wonderful new fresh green weeds coming up that have no seeds. So when you pull them out, put them in there too. So you can really get a nice mix of stuff going early. Grass clippings. If you have a lawn service and they use herbicides, you probably don't want that in your compost. They can stay there, and then you put them on your plants, and you could kill them. That's a real tough issue. When you're talking about municipal composting areas, and I think Upper St. Clair does that, don't you? I know Mount Lebanon does. I thought Upper St. Clair did too. You might want to think about where you're going to put that. The danger is probably very, very small, but it is a thought. Most folks have lawn services. Most folks use weed and feed. Lots of folks use lots of stuff. Whatever's in the compost is going to be on your plants, so just think about it. Leaves, leaves, leaves. Lots of leaves. Manure. if anybody's really into dung and wants to start their own sturkerary, I have some information here on the value, fertilizer-wise, of different kinds of manure. Some things are better than others. And you know that you never, ever put cat or dog waste in there. Okay, everybody knows that. Horse manure is my personal favorite. It's so readily available. Luella came to my house last weekend and she brought me a bucket of cow manure. I was so fresh, very fresh. I was so happy. She knows how to make me happy. Food scraps, let's just briefly touch on that. Everybody that composts knows, and probably everybody knows, you never ever put oil, fat, grease, animal products into your compost. You'll get smells, you'll get rodents perhaps. That rodent issue we'll get to after we get all done with this. That's a touchy one. Yes?
About the leaves, how about oak leaves? Aren't they too astringent to?
No, no, no. Because they're going to dry up. All that you've got there is the carbons that they produce. No, there's no such thing as a bad leaf for your I can't think right now of a bad leaf to put in your no, don't sit there sorting leaves. No, just no problem. Sawdust. A little bit of sawdust is fine. Neighbor cuts down a tree, throw some in. The thing about composting, it's kind of like building a tort. Layers works best. You know, a little bit of dirt, some leaves, some grass, some kitchen, some more dirt, some sawdust. Has anybody heard that thing about don't put your wood ashes in your compost? And that's not really, I was told that at one point, and I believed that, and I thought, no, wait a minute, what am I going to do with all these ashes? I've got 2 fireplaces, and we burn. And I'm not going to put that in a plastic bag and send it to the landfill. I'm not going to do that. You can put your wood ashes in there. That's a rich source of potassium. But you can't put too much. But again, if you layer them out. And what I do with my extra wood ashes, if you know any of my neighbors, they probably will tell you that that lady's crazy. But I gather up all my ashes out of the fireplace into a big plastic bag, paper bag, and then I just kind of walk around the yard and broadcast them. It's a great source of potassium. It does pretty much the same. It kind of acts like lime on your soil. And as long as it's not concentrated, it's not going to do any harm, and it's going to do some good. And again, that's one less thing to put in the landfill. Never throw away dirt. Used potting soil. I have never, ever, ever thrown away. When I replant or repot, I'll never throw away dirt. Unless you had some horrible disease in it, of course. But that's an excellent source. Just tea bags. I even buy the kind without the staples, so I don't have to worry about that. Coffee filter. The coffee and the filter, right in there. Okay, let's go. Now they say, okay, avoid organic materials. And these are the problems. Smell. I always wash my eggshells, and my son laughs at me. He says, Mom, it's compost, but it stinks. Another thing I do with my eggshells in the spring, I wash them, I let them dry, and I crush them, and I put them where I feed the birds, in my feed or whatever. You know, the mother birds need extra calcium to make strong eggs in the spring. That's just a good thing to do. And we talked about some weeds that have gone to seed. You can really add to the problem. Now, I don't have a problem with a few little weeds coming up where I've used compost, but why ask for trouble? So if you get your weeds early in the season, you certainly can put them in there. They're good organic sources of nitrogen, but it's just later in the season that you might want to worry. What I've been doing is I go around when my dandelions come up and I break off their little heads and get rid of that, and then I dig up the dandelion and put the plant in the compost. Materials to avoid, we did say, never ever cat or dog feces, and don't put kitty litter in because it'll be there in the next millennium. Anything that you feel died of a terrible disease shouldn't go in there. I had a horrible infestation on my irises a couple of years ago. They tell you you're supposed to divide them every so many years. Well, I didn't. and they got iris borers, and I didn't know it until one day they'd finished blooming and they just fell apart. And I got down in there and they had bacterial rot. Exactly what the book tells you will happen. Classic picture book story. I had to dig them all up, take them off my property. I didn't dare put them anywhere because that stuff was foul and that could have just ruined anything that it touched. It's very nasty, nasty disease. So infected, diseased plants, anything that your good sense tells you is rotten, shouldn't go in there. Things to avoid. Now they're talking about the wood ash. But I researched this afternoon. I went to 3 different books. And you can, if it's done sparingly. I've never had a problem with odor, but again, I do it lightly. I don't do a lot at one time, and I do it in layers. I usually have a bucket with a lid on it where I keep them and then use them as I need them. And lime, I think I've on occasion, if I had a little left over, tossed it in there. There's hardly anything bad to put in there except animal fats and that sort of thing, as long as it's done carefully, sparingly, in layers. You can really hide a lot of junk in your compost. No, it's not necessary. The smaller your pieces, like Lois was saying, she cuts her grass 3 times. The leaves. She mulches them 3 different times. And someone else said something about that. The smaller the particles, the more quickly they will decompose. But there's a downside to really small particles, and I think that's on the next slide. Every morning when I have my banana, I have my little countertop container, and I just kind of slice my banana, my little kitchen shears, and I slice it in there. I've been known to spend more time cutting up grapefruit rinds than it took me to section the grapefruit, but that's me, Or you can put the whole thing in. It'll all get there. It'll just take longer. It's whatever you need. The reasons the smaller particles decompose faster, obviously greater volume, allowing the microbes to get there. I just got a chipper shredder last fall. I haven't had a chance to use it yet. I bet my compost is going to be so fast this year when I put all that shredded stuff. I just can't wait. Okay, here's the downside. May lead to anaerobic conditions, and you may need to turn it more often. If you're a laid-back composter who isn't in a hurry, like John was saying, he's just got 3 or 4 years worth of leaves and grass all pushed aside. They haven't used it yet. That's fine. Those big particles will do very well. He doesn't turn it. You don't have to. But if you've got little bitty things in there, the more you flip them around. A good example of an anaerobic condition, you put grass clippings in a black plastic bag and forget about it for a week, and you tie the bag shut and you open it. That's anaerobic. You don't want that. That is foul. And there are surprisingly people who think that that's composting. Can you imagine? My boss said that to me today. Oh, yeah, that's that smelly stuff. Is that what you're going to talk about? It's not smelly. I'm going to take this in and show it. More about food for our decomposers. That's right. Lots of things are brown besides leaves. Your paper is considered brown. Your coffee grounds. The only way I can remember all of this is anything that just was very recently growing is green. Everything else is brown. The people that did the first composting class I attended were pretty fanatic, I thought. Every cardboard box that you have in your kitchen from which a mix comes, you should tear up and put in there. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. It just depends on how much time you have. So many things that pass through our kitchen. Like these gals shred their paper bags from the grocery store. I don't. I put leaves in them and when I need more compost, like if I have extra leaves in the fall. And Luella, she saves, how many bags of leaves did you save this winter?
3 huge ones, because I don't have any leaves in my yard. Oh, 3 bags, big bags that people rake, because I don't have any leaves in my yard. But I was telling Mary on the way over here, I was driving to Wexford this morning, and I'm driving by, and this one yard, these people had raked all their leaves up. There had to be 6 huge, clear plastic bags full of leaves that I could see as I was driving by. And all I kept thinking was, boy, someone could really use them for the bronze. They really could, you know. And
I'm surprised you didn't stop.
I was in a hurry.
Even I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. If you have a shredder by your desk, yeah. Real heavy colored paper like some of the advertising circulars are, oh, I don't know. I'm not that desperate. But white papers, bills, flat kinds of papers, things like that, sure, absolutely. And again, with the layers. I was so excited when my husband got his shredder. I said, oh, yes, I can put them in my compost. That works very
Can I ask a question you want? Okay, so I understand about the layering. My problem is I don't have a particularly big yard, but we have a bunch of trees. And I get, kind of 3 bags. I could fill up 300 bags in the month of October, right? And what the heck am I supposed to do? There's no way I could have enough greens to mix in with that.
You know what? If you've got all those leaves, I wouldn't even worry about it. I would save those leaves, put them in a place where they can work down over the winter. Even if you don't get, quote, finished compost like we have here, you will have the most fabulous leaf mold. And it's wonderful in and of itself. You pick it, if you did all that stuff in October, early November, and it sat out in the open, all went in a tight kind of a circle or in a bin or something, so they weren't blowing all around. If they were together, and all the snow and ice that we have had this winter and the ups and downs of temperatures, I think you would just be astounded at what you had come spring. Okay, do you ever flip it? You're not going to get everything at the right time. Sometimes people save leaves. I did that last year. We were going to build our compost bins at South Park, and all we had was greens from the gardens, from the annuals, and we didn't have any browns. So I saved the nice big plastic bags that I buy in Upper St. Clair, and I saved them all winter. I was shocked when I took them out there in the late spring. I think we planted June 2nd, or it was even later that we finally got started on the bins. I couldn't believe how those leaves had changed in the paper bags from last October. The bags were falling apart. I had to put the paper bags with the leaves into plastic bags because I couldn't transport them otherwise. A lot of change had happened. It's just going to take longer. And here you can recycle your leaves, can't you? Upper St. Clair picks up paper bags of leaves.
Yeah.
Keep what you're comfortable with and let the rest go, because they will be composted. It's not like you're putting them in the landfill. But you might want to hold some of them back. For my own personal use at home, my bins are not that big, and so I'll save a couple of those big paper bags of leaves. And my one bin is just like a big square, and my other one's closed. And I just tuck those bags behind that and let them sit there all winter, and a lot of change happens. Come spring, I just throw them in. I start throwing in my weeds, whatever I have, flip it around. It works. Don't get too hung up on the ratio. They'll tell you 3 parts brown to 1 part green. And some sources will say 2 parts brown to 1 part green. Remember what Luella said. This can be as hard or as easy as you want. If you don't do anything, it's still going to break down, and you're still going to have a wonderful soil amendment. Just might take a little longer. You might want to have Lois come over and mulch your leaves for you.
What I was going to say, it does, basically, leaves take 2 years. Now, in October, a year later, when I need the place for the new stuff, for the new leaves, because most of my stuff is leaves, then I will have by then taken it out in the hot weather and used it as mulch under the tomatoes.
Excellent, yes.
So, and then when it, then by October, it's pretty much gone. It's still there a little bit. But basically, leaves take 2 years, really.
That sounds fair. They'll go a lot faster, I would think, the way you do them.
Yeah, I'm
into
making
such
them
little
very
tiny
thin.
pieces. Me, they're
But-
big. They're big. I can't be bothered with that.
I have a, excuse me, I have a question about adding the cardboard that has colored printing on it or paper that has color. Is there not a concern about toxic paints or print? I mean, just different colors have certain
Yeah.
toxic properties.
I probably just instinctively don't put that in. I don't think, the quantities that we're talking, it's probably not a problem. But if you took every single piece of colored paper that came through your house, or any of our houses, and we got a lot, the Kohl's catalog, I don't shred that and put, I just don't. I think it's probably okay, but I'd rather not, I don't need it. I mean, I feel bad not utilizing it, but I think I just would not. What did I just read today? Something about something that might have PCBs in it. It was in one of my books. Oh, I'll rack my brain to see if I can think what that was. And I thought, whoa, I never thought of that. You know, I don't think it would be any problem in small amounts, but I just think I wouldn't put a lot of that in there. You know.
I usually do coffee paper and things like that. That's mostly what I do.
Yeah.
But I have put in like advertisements or had the little fillers they put in the envelopes to come up with the stamp weight.
Mm-hmm.
And I put those in without a problem. I have black gold.
I have a question. I kind of worry about the Upper St. Clair compost now. It's very well done. It's been stirred. It's 2 years old. But a lot of these people have lawn service, as you said, and a lot of these people have dogs, and dogs have worms. Do we use that in the vegetable garden?
You know what? Everything that I've read tells you do not use grass clippings that have been treated with pesticides or herbicides. They may remain in there, and you may then be applying them to your plants. I would not. You can use that for other purposes.
You mean like around a tree or something?
Yes, if it's not, y'all know about mulch, no more than 2 or 3 inches deep and never up against the trunk of the tree. Okay. That would be okay, probably. I wouldn't have a problem with that. I wouldn't put it, I just wouldn't, I'm trying to think where could you use it. You could use it as mulch, maybe away from plants. You could use it as, oh, I know where you could use it. You could use it on your lawn. Top dress your lawn. Did you ever have leftover peat moss and you didn't know what to do with it and you didn't want to store it anymore? Well, again, I walk around the yard and I just kind of spread it all out. That's what I would do with that compost, because it's got herbicides and or pesticides, possibly. We don't know for a fact because I don't think anybody goes around and tests it, but it's possible that it came off grass, so put it back on grass. That's what you do with that. You solve that problem.
Okay, I've got another question. I'm sorry to,
That's
I don't mean to
fine.
dominate
No, no.
this, but I've got full of questions.
You got
I've
a
been trying to do this
problem.
for years and it hasn't
Aw.
worked. So the greens, so the most likely source of greens is grass clippings, except I've always been taught or learned that you should not be gathering greens. You should not, cut your grass frequently enough and just cut a 1/4 of an inch off or something like that,
Yeah.
and then let it set back into the lawn. So
Yes.
so much for that source of
Right.
greens.
Ah, well, that's why I do kitchen scraps.
I'm sorry?
That's why I do kitchen scraps.
That's right. Well, yeah,
That's
yeah, but
all
kitchen scraps,
green.
we couldn't fill, we have one of those containers on thing, we fill that twice a day, and it still is a tiny fraction of the
Yeah.
browns.
I have to add this in there. I was telling Mary. You talk for a while. Okay. Over the winter, I put a 3-pound can, empty coffee can, on my counter. It isn't very attractive. I either have red or blue or green for the decaf. But over the winter, and this was a particularly hard, cold winter, and it was a little icy, and I was afraid to walk to the back of the yard, which is where I have it. And I had 13 cans from my kitchen just over the colder, when it got really cold. 13 cans.
We have 2 teenagers at home.
I can fill Okay.
13 cans in 3 days.
Believe me, you will have enough greens if you save it. You know, everything that you can. And you'll see, I believe the next slide addresses the greens. We have the browns here. But the next slide will address the greens. Are there any more questions?
I think I'm in trouble here.
Are you an engineer?
No.
May I ask what you do for a living?
Oh, I'm a salesman.
Okay. I think you're just too worried about the ratio.
Well, actually, my problem is like leaves.
Why don't you
I
cut
just-
down a few trees? No, I wasn't.
We have a lot of leaves.
Yeah.
And they just overwhelm everything for 1 month.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, do you have room where you can bag them and save them?
Yeah.
Or keep, I get rid of leaves. I have to tell you that. I have 2 compost bins. I've been doing this for 35 years. I can't use all my leaves. I can't. They go out to the curb. And I hope and pray that they end up where they're supposed to, but who knows?
I get the leaves. Summer, that's when you're going to wish you
Had the leaves, right.
I've lived in this house for 36 years, and I probably haven't put 5 bags of leaves to the curb in 36 years.
Good for you.
I
Then
have
tell them how to do it.
trees.
Yes.
I have trees. The back of my lot is treed. Also, in the front, I have trees. So everything has to come off the grass, wherever there's grass. It goes to the back of the lot, under the trees that are back there. Now, I am beginning to find that perhaps that's not the best thing. I don't have a compost pile. I gave up on that long ago. It was just easier to take
Yeah.
my leaves and spread them,
Mhm.
which is what we do. We drag them to the back on a
Mhm.
great big huge sheet. We
Mhm.
just shake the sheet out, and where the leaves fall, they lay.
Right.
And by spring, they've
They're-
gone from
That's
18
right.
inches
That's
down
right.
to this.
That's right.
And I'm ready for the next year.
That's right, yeah.
But I'm not getting undergrowth, which I'd like to have some of now.
Mhm.
And between the deer perhaps and/or the overlay of too many leaves,
Mhm.
I now don't have undergrowth.
Right.
But I certainly have black gold.
Yes, I was going to say, I bet you the soil that's under there must be fabulous. Must just be wonderful. I don't know, we'll have to help this guy. He's just really hung up on his. There's, yes.
It is true, you know, they say that you're supposed to cut the grass and not bag it, but, you know, every other week, bag it
You've got 2 teenagers.
and use it in your compost.
Kidding?
If you want the compost,
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. They're not going to be there much longer, and trust me, you will miss your children in the fall when it's cool. Oh, my God, do I miss them. I call them and say, don't you want to come home? That would be the perfect solution. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Okay. Browns, obvious. Now, of course, I have my fresh cow manure, which is full of straw also. You all know that we have many, many places to get manure, and most of it's not real fresh when you get it. The stables in South Park, have you been out there? Maybe you all know somebody who can do this for you, but right at the Stoltz Road and McConkey Road, there's a stable. There's a couple stables there, but the one gentleman, his stable sits like up on an embankment, and he pushes all of the manure and beautiful sawdust that they use in their bedding for their stalls down the hillside. And that's free pickings for anybody who wants to come there. We go there every fall for our gardens, our demonstration gardens in South Park, and we fill, 4 truckloads, pickup truckloads. We muck manure, and then we cart it up there, and then we muck it back out. And our soil is absolutely incredible. So we put it on when we pulled out all the plants. I think it was early November this year. and just spread it on the top. And when we go back this spring, we just push it aside, plant. It's gorgeous. It's free. It's not that smelly either, really, because it's pretty old. Greens, high nitrogen materials. Okay, here we go with our coffee grounds, and don't forget to throw in the filter. All of my vegetable peelings, my beloved horse manure. Oh, here's the breakdown, yeah. See, they rate horses higher than cows. Most people tend to rate cows higher than horses. And somebody, what's chicken? Is that poultry? I don't want to go there. And I'm not doing hogs. But if you think about it, these animals eat nothing but vegetables, grains, grasses. It's not like human waste or even, you know, like our pets with their meat and all. So it really is a nice source. And I never have any problem with getting enough of it. You know, there's plenty of it out there. Yeah.
What are the numbers after the items?
Okay, vegetable scraps. Oh, there's two numbers there. It can range, wait a minute, such a... Oh, okay. Yes, right. If you're mixing, there, see, that's where he could, here's some ratios on browns to greens. 12 to 20 parts brown materials to 1 part of vegetable scraps. 20 parts of browns to your coffee grounds, to 1 part of your coffee grounds. So you see those ratios are different. People telling us 3 to 1, it doesn't always hold true. What you need is some horse manure to get that thing jump-started. That's what you need. The differences in them, pretty obvious. If you think about the material, like leaves are dry already anyway. Slow to decay. Because they have so much surface area, they do a much better job at aerating. You think about how fine grass is, that's not going to allow for much airflow. May need to stockpile until can mix with greens. That's what he needs to do. And the poor aeration may have foul odors. That's the grass in a black plastic bag. And nobody wants that. So it's nice to have it all, but if you can't have it all at once, just do the best you can. That's why I was saying spring is such a really good time to start, because you've got everything you need to get jump-started. Oxygen, obviously, is very important. That's why if you see pictures of most compost units, they have open or mesh sides. Although I know people who can compost very successfully with a pile of cinder blocks, maybe about so high. They may have to turn a little more often to get the air in there, but it can be as simple as some cinder blocks you picked up somewhere. My big compost bin is nothing but a pallet, some leftover pieces of lattice tacked to tomato stakes. And I left the front side open. I did it myself. It was no big deal. Women can do these things by themselves. We don't. I remember when I went to my interview for the Master Gardener class, and I said, you got to let me in this class. I took a day off from work to come here. I have wanted to do this for years. I am a compost fanatic. I plan to go out and teach personal care homes how to compost their kitchen scraps so they can plant herbs and vegetables for their residents and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You must let me in this thing. And the man said, I suppose your husband turns your compost bins. I was so offended. I've not spoken to that man since. Aerobic decomposers produce heat. So it's the oxygen and your little critters in there making heat that's going to break things down more quickly. Go ahead. Of course we want it to be aerobic. We do not want anaerobic. Temperature range. I've never, ever seen my piles get that hot. I never have. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but they decompose. So how wrong can it be?
Yes. Last year, as I Okay. Last year, as I told you, I put the shredded paper from my shredder into the compost pile. So I was turning it. I have a neat little turner because I have a bad back, and I'll talk about that after the class or later on. And it's for those of us that have a little bit of a problem with the pitchfork and turning. But I'm turning it, and lo and behold, I looked, and there was a piece of paper that was so hot, it was red. And there's always a little bit of steam coming out, but it was actually red like an ember. And I was so excited, and I'm looking around, and there was nobody there to share this with. And I know that was gone in a minute. I mean, it just cooled down. But I told Mary that story because that's how hot this actually gets. And I use no starters, nothing. Like Mary said, compost happens. Just let it go, and it'll work. You'll have your heat.
Obviously, it works because I get gorgeous stuff in a season. But it's just not, I've never gotten it, well, I've never took its temperature either, but I'm sure, I never felt like it was hot to the touch. I truly did not. Does it have to get hot? Decay will be slower, may take longer. Not enough air, too much water. I don't know. The quicker you want it, the more you want your pile to get hot. I mean, her stuff goes much faster than mine, obviously. I'm not the best stirrer in the world. I do it when the mood strikes me. But if you do get a high temperature, if you've been composting weeds and things, or you're concerned about pathogens or whatever, that's going to take care of a lot of that. So that's really one good reason why you might want to have that goal of doing your pile correctly enough to get a high temperature. I might just check mine this year, but I don't remember it. Yes.
If you think that your compost pile is hot, turn it over in the, on a cool day and just watch the steam rise.
Yeah.
And you'll know that it's cooking in there.
Yeah.
Yes, it's working. I know that if we go out to the compost pile out where the township does it, on a cool day, you'll just see
You'll
the
see the
steam
heat.
rise.
Yeah, that's good. I'm sure they all do get warm to a degree. I just have not particularly noticed it. Have you heard about putting like a PVC pipe or something in the middle of your pile to help aeration? I've been doing this for all these years, right? And I think I know what I'm doing. I just learned something the other day, and Luella told me. I had read that numerous places, so I got someone to give me a piece about so big. It's about 6 inches in diameter. And I cleared out the compost, and I stuck the thing in there, and I didn't see any difference. You're supposed to punch holes in it. So my husband has, that I am going to let him do. I'm going to let him drill the holes. I thought, why isn't this working? That's why. See, nobody knows everything. Nobody knows it all. Getting air to your decomposers. Okay, warm air rising through the pile. That's why you want the mesh sides. The lattice is rather attractive. It's real cheap. It has held up, oh, that thing's got to be 6 or more years old. It's still fine. I had to change the pallet underneath. It rotted through finally. But my cheap little lattice, and it looks kind of cute out there. It's not offensive to the eye at all, I don't think.
Mary, that's fine if you have the land to do that, and the yard. But some of us live in Lower St. Clair. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's like the Brookline area. And my yard is not quite that large. And I have the plastic, the earth compost bins, earth bins, and they work fine. And they are plastics because we're not able to do what you're doing here.
The earth bins have lots of vents in them. They work really well. And we'll talk about that just before we leave tonight, where and how you can get them if you wish. You want to go ahead, Luella? Get to work, girl. What the hell are you for? Pile aeration. That's pretty self-explanatory. Perforated pipes. Yeah, if I had paid attention to this the first time I saw it, I'd have known that. Yes. Yeah. I don't have any problem. In fact, I think I probably still have a few little twigs in here. as I'm walking through in the spring, little tiny things, I just kind of break them and throw them in there. Just every little bit helps. And the more variety of shapes and sizes you have, the better it's going to work. And I know that when I really do get good and I go out and I make an effort to flip the stuff from the sides onto the top and go back maybe a week later, I see a real big difference. You don't have to turn your pop, but when I do, it really helps. That's
What? I'm sorry, I want to add one more thing. A rule of thumb for the size of the twigs that you're putting into your compost pile is your thumb. You never want to have it any thicker than your thumb. And also, you never want to have anything longer than 6 inches in your compost pile. So you would want 6-inch twigs or whatever, and only no thicker than your thumb. Well, if you have more volume in the earth box, you might start out, the volume between, I add everything and put it all together, the volume gets like, imagine the earth box is about this high. You're going to see it on here. And it is almost to the top. By the time it's through, and it is actual usable compost, it's all the way down to like maybe 1/3. So don't feel that you're overfilling it, because you can do that.
I think there's a slide here that talks about if you're doing a freestanding pile about the size. They say that something like 3 by 3 is the minimum size. Anything larger than 5 by 5 is probably too big. There aren't very many hard and fast rules, but they do mention that. Turning, turning, turning. I have not seen Luella's tool.
That's what I have.
Okay, that's the turning tool. You know what works really well? Do any of you have a garden claw? That thing came out, yeah. Garden claw works really well. I have a really old antique I inherited from some in-laws. It's like a 3-pronged claw. It was some sort of a digger, some sort of a digger, I don't know. But it's got 3 curved prongs. And I just stick that thing down in there and kind of give it a flip, and it tosses the stuff up and around. For me, that works absolutely perfectly. I'm not going to go out and spend $40 on a tool to turn compost. You don't need fancy tools, but it does help to help. Like Luella said, it's a little hard for her.
This has, and I have to talk with my hands. I can't do that. But this has, at the bottom, see this the 2 little levers here?
Oh, that's right. I
It's like this, it's pointed. Like
Yeah.
You use these handles, and you shove it all the way down into the compost, and then you turn them. Well, those levers
They
open up like
pop
this,
up. That's I
and then you pull
did
it
see
up,
that.
and
Yeah.
it's wonderful. It probably made me continue composting, because it was getting very difficult to use the pitchfork on it. And they're about, I want to say $20. Most would be 30. It might have been $29.95. And you can see that in any catalog, or I believe it was Territorial Seeds, their website, that I found that and I ordered it. It's very helpful.
Yeah. That does seem like a nice tool. Water. For the most part, if you have an open bin, you're certainly going to get all that you need from rain and snow in all but the very driest times of year. It's very rare that I have to add liquid to my open bin. One thing I do, if I have anything left over, like pop, soda pop, flat beer, anything like that, I just pour it in there, and I figure the sugar will help to feed my little decomposers, make them happier. I don't throw anything away. And if you've ever worked with compost, you'll very quickly come to recognize that consistency that everybody talks about. When it's just right, the amount of moisture in there, it feels like a squeezed out sponge. No water dripping, but it's moist. And that's perfect. Got pretty dry last summer, and I did have to do that. My little earth bin, what I do, I have this little bucket that I keep my kitchen scraps on, and before I go out to the compost bin, I fill it up with water. And I just dump that on there, and that seems to be enough to keep the covered bin happy. But you just check on it. you're bright people. You would certainly know if it needed water. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Not a problem. Taking care. That's what our bins at South Park look like. And that must be what Lois's look like? You have 3? No. So far, we've filled them all with everything we took out of the garden. We'll see what they look like when we get back. But ideally, you've got the finished on the far right, the halfway done, and where you started there. Look at the size difference. Look at that. And Luella and I were talking about why they say allow it to cure, stand without mixing for at least 4 weeks before using. And the only thing that we can come up with is that like mulch or manure, it could still be hot. And if you put that on your plants, you could kill them. We had a problem with our mulch at our gardens last summer. We bought all that. We spent our hard-earned money. It's not easy to raise money to do this kind of thing. We bought our mulch, and we couldn't put it down. It was too hot. And we only got one set of plants, one chance to plant them, and if they died, we were dead for the whole summer. And we had to let that sit for several weeks before we could put it down. So I'm assuming that that's why they say that too, just to let it cool down. But I could be wrong. Don't know. The fast way. Okay, for the engineers and the salesmen among us. Outer to the center. That's what I do. I kind of flip stuff up. I make like a cone in the middle, and then the next time I go, I push that aside and pull the other stuff up. 140 degrees? I don't know. Maintain a lower temperature of about 100. I'm sure that I don't turn my pile every 5 to 7 days. We know people, and I guess I shouldn't mention names. We talked about the ethics of mentioning the name. Did you? Okay, then I'll mention his name. If you get the Post-Gazette, you know who Doug Oster is. He writes the columnist. Oh, he's the dearest man. He comes and helps us with, well, we work together on a lot of projects. He's the one who gave us the design for our bins in South Park. That's the classic 3-bin design, and that's what he uses at his home. He says, I never, ever, ever turn my pile. He's in no hurry. It happens. About 1/3 of the original, and then allow it to stand, yeah. I just put mine to bed, my little covered bin, whenever it got too cold to go out there every day, then I would not be saving my stuff all winter long. I just started up again, I think last week. It was like a glacier out there, and I wasn't going to go out there. And when I went out this past week, I was just astounded. That's where I got this. There's just nothing left but maybe 5-6 inches in the bottom, and it is gorgeous. And I didn't do anything all winter. When it looks like this, that's I think mine shrunk down even further. No readily recognizable feedstock, just tiny shards of eggshell, and of course my Easter grass is all that you can recognize there. No foul odor, and we did that. And if you can germinate. Well, I know it's done, but I mean, that's a test. Like, I'm going to show my boss. He says, smelly stuff. And if you germinate seeds, then you know it is. There's no question. You could grow anything in this stuff. It's very good. Okay, I think we're almost at the end here. What works in your, what? Oh, yeah. See, shaded area will prevent help drying out in summer. That's why you put it in the shade. Obviously, you don't want it where your children are playing or you're having activities or whatever. And you certainly want to be thoughtful of your neighbors. Not everyone's lot allows them to do what I'm able to do. I have a very deep lot, and everybody else does too, and mine's at the far back. I'm in no one's way. And I would never put a compost pile close to a neighbor's border without checking with them that that was not going to be a problem for them. You know, it's just common courtesy. Water available. Run the hose out there if you have to. Okay, go ahead. You put your compost pile wherever you can, basically. That's right, yeah. obviously good drainage, away from wells, that makes sense. And be a good neighbor, absolutely. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be ugly. It does not at all. Okay, there's a couple examples. The mesh basket with the open side. See, there's one with cinder blocks there, and that works well for a lot of folks. Just about, see, they're piles larger than 5 by 5 by 5 are difficult to turn and tend to become anaerobic in the center. Ideal size, a 3-foot cube for obvious reasons. Retains sufficient heat. I love the pallets and the sides. I like that look. We're going to put grapevine wreaths on ours, and we planted bulbs around it, so it's real pretty. This is an earth bin machine. That's exactly what I have at my house, and Luella does too. The lid locks on. They give you long, like they look like screws. They have turns on them. And there's holes in the bottom, and you anchor this thing to the ground. Mine's been in place for 3 years. It has never moved. I have never seen a rat. I have never seen one. And see, she's got food scraps on the top. Because this is pretty well closed. Now, field mice can get in there. A clever chipmunk probably could if they really wanted to. But I don't. And if I put fresh food in there, I put it down in, and I cover it over. You had a question?
No, I took a composting class last fall where they gave those earth bins away. And what they told you to do was just get some contractor's mesh. You get the small mesh, and you lay it down on the ground. You put that on top of it, and then you put your screws in, and it keeps anything from
You know what,
getting in.
that's excellent. Nobody told me that when I got mine. That's very good. Thank you very much. I'll remember that. Yes.
Everybody seems to be worried about rats, and I know Annette has had them. And
Right.
since she had them, I've watched very carefully. I don't do any of these cautionary things, you know, except not put meat in.
Right.
And I've never had a rat yet. I don't even have skunks that get into it, or raccoons. I have them up under the bird feeder, but they don't bother the compost. Now,
There are just sometimes places where rats have established colonies, and I understand it's very difficult to get rid of them. Your municipality can help you with that. I know a friend of mine in Mount Lebanon had a horrible rat problem. And when the men came out from the township, she had 4 dogs in a very small fenced-in yard. Her backyard was a sea of dog feces. That's why she had rats. Bird seed that falls to the ground. You buy the good stuff, the birds eat it. It doesn't make its way to the ground. You're probably going to have less of a problem. A lot of people are afraid to even feed their birds close to the house because of that. Is this the last slide? Oh, some problems that you might anticipate. Odors. And you'd know if you had it. No question about that. You can get an ammonia odor from too much grass. And then you would just add some of his leaves, and that would correct the problem. Okay. Yes, here they very briefly address the issue. Presence of meat scraps or fatty food wastes. Cover with sawdust or leaves. Turn the pile. Compost in an animal-proof bin. And that tip that she mentioned is certainly very good for that. Worm composting. I've never gotten into that, but that sounds fascinating. I asked my husband if I could have one at my house in the kitchen, and he vetoed it, and I didn't know why. I've heard people say there is absolutely no odor if you do it right. Go ahead. Temperature too low. Those might be the problems. Your pile is too big. Turn. They keep telling us to turn, don't they? They won't get away from that. Work. Okay. Promotes soil health. Luella addressed that. Attracts earthworms, supplies organic material. Is there anyone here who needs to be convinced of what compost can do for your soil, your plants, your garden, your lawn? Because I can go off on that real easy, but I think I'm preaching to the choir.
Well, I don't want to get you carried. I don't want you to go off, right? So what do you do with the stuff?
Oh, okay, we'll talk about that. Let's get through the slides, turn the lights back on, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
Obvious. Promotes soil health. Go ahead. they can read that. As Luella pointed out, it is not a fertilizer. The nutrient content of finished compost is probably 1-1-1. That's nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. But it makes micronutrients available to the plants. You can put all the Miracle-Gro in the world you want on your plant, but if the plant can't take up the food, nothing's going to happen. The trace elements that are in there, the micronutrients, the conditioning of the soil, the increased water holding capacity are the things that are going to help your plants to grow. Be sure it's mature, has an earthy smell. Yeah, that's right. We knew we'd get there. Okay. Improve water and nutrition, retention of sandy soils. It makes every soil better. We have clay here, and I just read this afternoon when I was thinking about coming here, how compost does that. With the clay has such an incredible water holding capacity. It binds together, and the compost breaks some of the aggregates apart, and then the clay forms with the compost into much smaller particles, more capable of allowing circulation. I don't know how else to say that. Improve soil health mixed in the top couple of inches. Lots of people put it on their grass every year. Go ahead. Okay, using it as mulch. You can go out and spend $150 down at Jim Jenkins, or you can use this. Depends on what you look. A lot of people want that really pretty stuff out front, but for everything in the back, or for the vegetable gardens or little beds. Prevents moisture loss from soil. Really cut down on your watering if you protect your plants this way. It does lots of good things. Lawn top dressing, okay? You read that? That's right. That's why some people screen, so that when they put it on their lawn, there's absolutely no little particles whatsoever. I'm not that into it, and you can use it for potting mix. If you've done everything correctly, it's very mature, you know that there's no heat retained in there, and you wouldn't want to use all that. But certainly for your container plants outside, pots can get so heavy. I usually put newspaper, shredded newspaper in the bottom, a lot of that. Then I'll put my own compost in that, and really have very little potting mix there. That's expensive. The shredded paper and the compost are free. It makes a nice water retentive thing, and it's light. And that was and all this was presented by College of Agricultural Sciences. Can you use compost to use finished compost? Are you happy with what you saw? Is that enough for you? What do you
create the stuff mostly? That's where I'm still struggling.
You're still struggling with creation.
Well, my neighbor, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. She pointed out that maybe it takes 2 years for leaves to fully compost, and I think maybe I need to reset my expectations.
Yeah.
Because I was looking for it to happen, and
Really
I'm reading these books. I've read a couple of those books up there.
It can
and they
happen
talk
real
about
fast.
12 days you've got
Okay, but
compost.
that's a
Overnight
small-
you've got compost. It's,
Patience.
well, not, tell that to the authors.
But if you read the book, you'd know that he was using a small bin. He was turning it every day. He was using incredibly fine particles. And
Sure.
babies, you can do that if you want to, but who wants to?
Sure, well, I've got
I'm not in that big of a
700
hurry.
cubic yards of
You wanna
leaves
get
in
rid of
October. That's what I'm trying to deal
Well,
with.
have Lois come over with her mulching mower, run over them 3 or 4 times, and you'll have no problem. Yeah. Listen, Luella will come by and pick them up. You heard her. All right. Other issues that we were going to address. I'm sorry. Oh, yes, you wanted, okay. This year, the Pennsylvania Resources Council, and you seem to know about them. Do you know any more about the organization? I don't.
They're a nonprofit organization that basically their mission is to reduce waste in general.
Exactly. That's where they come
And so
from.
they promote composting. They heavily promote recycling, And they have a lot of programs and education programs regarding all of those things.
Okay. You probably don't need to be convinced of the need for reducing, reusing, recycling. This community's been doing that for many, many years. There are folks out there who don't know that yet. And so I would hope that as gardeners, composters, you're helping to spread that word. About the Pennsylvania Resources Council, they're offering 12 classes this year. Here we go. The first class is this month, Wednesday, March 31st at the Mount Lebanon Library. It's from 6 to 8 p.m. There's one coming up a little bit later, Wednesday, April 21st at South Park Buffalo Inn, again from 6 to 8 p.m. And at this program, you will get the same class that you attended last fall, and this wonderful book. This is just the cutest little book. It's witty, it's funny, it's factual, it doesn't take it too seriously, and it doesn't make it hard. Anybody can do it. I would just. You make me feel bad. And then you get the earth bin. The earth bin, mine stands about hip high, my hip high. It's about this big around, a locking lid, screws, long screws that attach it to the ground. And as this gal said, if you put down a piece of wire mesh underneath, you're going to have much less likelihood of critters coming in. This stuff goes so fast. It really does. Mine has been filled to the brim. I couldn't tell you how many times. I even had neighbors putting stuff in because they didn't have one. They were too lazy to go to the program, or too cheap to spend $20. And it's down. It just goes down so quickly. So you'll learn a little bit more about composting. You'll get a free earth bin. You pay for the class. It's $20 a person or $30 per couple. And I would highly recommend it. You can go out and buy composters. If you have physical problems, like perhaps your husband, he doesn't want to compost, he thinks it's too much work, it's really not. It can be as little or as big, but you can buy the kind that you turn. They tend to be pricey. They tend to be big. I think they're ugly, but I like the fact that they're off the ground.
Has anyone ever used one of those composters that
They're
you turn?
one of our Penn State Master Gardeners, Lynn Miller, they actually built one in their yard, and they put it up on stone or concrete blocks, and they used an old drum, like an oil drum, and he put holes in it and put some wire screen over it, and he just turns it with the handle. That optimally is what I would like to have.
Did it work?
Fantastic. Yes, yes.
My only concern about that is, you know, I mean, part of the composting